There was one sort of unsung hero on this expedition, Oliver Wheeler, who I was drawn to in part because he was Canadian, in part because Mallory famously hated Canadians, and being a Canadian, that drew my attention. And I went and found, rather serendipitously, Oliver Wheeler's son, John, age 77, living in a cottage 4 houses from the house in which I was born in Vancouver. I went to see him, and we had a splendid afternoon. At the end of the afternoon, he pulled off his shelf 2 treasures, 2 thick volumes of journals that his father had kept in 1921 as he walked across Tibet with George Mallory. These had never been seen by a historian. I was too Canadian. I couldn't even sputter the words to say. And then in this marvelous way that is Canada, I discovered that he had gone to the same boarding school as my father. I had climbed many of the same mountains he had surveyed as a surveyor in the Geological Survey of Canada. And at the end of this beautiful afternoon, he simply handed me these 2 journals and said, "Son, I think these will really be useful to you." Well, they certainly were, because of course it wasn't George Mallory who found the key to the North Col, the East Rongbuk Glacier. It was not. It was Oliver Wheeler. He was the one who spent more time closer to the mountain, photographing its armor. He's the one who found the doorway to the mountain. And on the very day that Alexander Kellis was buried, this is what Wheeler wrote in his journal. "Well, they buried the old boy in the morning, thought it was going to be the afternoon, terribly sorry to have missed it, but I do hate funerals." Well, how on earth do you miss the interment of a fellow climber that you're marching across Tibet with? There had to be more to the story, and of course there was. Wheeler was born to be a soldier. He was seconded to the 7th Mer Division of the Indian Army. He was a Royal Engineer. He sailed with the Indian Army to France in August of 1914. By October of 1914, the entire British Home Army, the regular army of the Empire, had been annihilated, the British Expeditionary Force. The British sector of the line was held by the Canadians in the north, the Indian Army in the south. And by this point, the topography of Armageddon had come into place. The trenches reached the coastline from the Swiss border, and both sides were beginning to sap each other. Trenches at 90 degrees to the trench lines, so you could get close and lob bombs and raid your enemy. And it came to the attention of Wheeler's battalion that the Germans had put 2 saps within 30 feet of their line. He was given the order on a dark November night to go over the top with his 125 men, and not only to eliminate these saps, but to do it in a way that the Germans would be dissuaded from ever trying this technique again. He goes over the night at the top in the darkness, silence, then all hell breaks loose. Very lights, artillery, machine gun fire, and they get to the saps, and to their horror they discover they're filled with German soldiers about to attack them. The result is a ferocious melee of hand-to-hand combat beyond your imaginings. Noses ripped off, eyes gouged out, clubs shattering brains. Eventually the Indians push the Germans back, but not before the entire sap is densely lined, 3 bodies deep, chest to chest, of boys of both sides, flailing about, as Wheeler said, like trout in my kraal. He then tried his best in the darkness to get his own wounded out, but he couldn't. And in the end, he had to bury them all alive. So when he says on Everest, "I do hate funerals," you begin to see the way that this war resonated in the lives of these men.